So we've looked at the legal definition of redundancy, and we've also looked at the contractual framework in which you will be operating. So it's now time to look at what a fair procedure would look like. Now, the standards that employers are expected to adhere to are the standards of a reasonable employer. And if there is a dispute, that's a decision that will be made by the employment tribunal. But they won't be looking to substitute what they think they would have done for your own decisions. As long as you stay within what they call a band of reasonableness, you'll be okay. So what I'm going to say now is I'm going to describe a typical fair procedure, but it won't always be necessary for all the steps to be taken, and you may wish to vary the order in certain circumstances, but generally speaking, there are key ingredients which you'll find in all fair redundancy procedures, and that's what I'm going to concentrate on. The first thing you need to start with is warning. You need to inform your employees of what's going on as soon as possible. Now, obviously this is a balancing exercise, because if you tell people too early, you'll worry them for no reason, particularly if you can resolve things without declaring redundancies. If, on the other hand, you leave things too late, you'll unsettle the employees, you'll look bad, and you won't give them the opportunity to digest the news in the best way. So warnings are always a balancing exercise, but it's important to do that as soon as you reasonably can. The second early thing you need to think about is involving the trade union, if there is one. If you have a recognised trade union, they will want to be involved at the early stage, in the planning stage of the process. They may not need to be involved in individual meetings with all the employees, but they'll want to be able to shape things like how you devise the pool, how you reach the selection criteria, things I'm going to come on to in a minute. But I would say that we're not talking about collective consultation here. There's no formal requirement to involve the union unless you're doing large-scale redundancies. That's where you have 20 or more members of staff being dismissed in a defined time period. Having warned employees and having involved the union, the next thing you need to do is decide what the pool is. That is to say, the employees you're going to select from in order to make those redundancies. Now, in most cases, it's fairly easy to decide who you should put at risk, who you should select from, but in some instances it can be quite difficult. Now, the employment tribunal is not normally going to interfere, so as long as you take a reasonable decision, you should be okay, and in many cases the pool will select itself. In some cases, it's even possible to have a pool of one person, although that generally isn't recommended. So having established the pool, the group of people from whom you're going to select, the next thing is to decide how you're going to select people for redundancy. That's known as the selection criteria. Now, in the bad old days, it used to be quite simple. You just used to say, those who joined last go out first, last in, first out. That's not regarded as a fair selection process anymore, partly because it discriminates against younger workers, and partly because it isn't really fair. It doesn't look at the whole picture. So what people are expected to do these days is to have a range of selection criteria and then reach an overall score. And typical selection criteria would be attendance patterns. In other words, if you had good attendance record, you'd be rewarded in some way. You might want to look at the results of annual performance reviews. You might want to have some kind of rating by the line managers on objective grounds, which would need to be agreed. And you might also include as one of the ingredients length of service, as obviously you need to reward that in some ways. So having established selection criteria, you then need to go on to explain those to the individual employees, and that's the first part of the formal consultation process. So having established the pool, having established the selection criteria, and if necessary agreed those with the union, you need to set up meetings with individual employees to explain what's going on. Now, you may want, or you certainly should, give employees in this situation the opportunity to have a companion at these meetings. There's no formal requirement to do this, but it's best practice to allow them to choose a companion. That could be a colleague or it could be a union official. Now, all these first consultation meetings, it's important to stress that no decisions have been made. It's also important to explain how the process is going to be work clearly and give employees the chance to answer questions and raise concerns. Indeed, they may want to raise ideas about how redundancies could be avoided. It's important to realise that the Employment Tribunal will expect people to take every step to avoid redundancies, and one of the things that people might want to might be prepared to offer is reduced working hours, perhaps even a pay cut, to avoid losing their job. Sometimes if you've got a number of meetings to hold, it's a good idea to have a script so to make sure that you have a consistent message. So that's the first consultation meeting. Then you need to go back and have the difficult job of actually applying the selection criteria and scoring everyone. Now, needless to say, this is the most controversial part of the whole process, and you need to make sure that you can justify the marks you give people, and you also need to keep very good records, because they'll certainly be called for if there is a dispute. Sometimes it's worth thinking about moderating the scores. If you have a number of line managers scoring different groups of people, you'll want to make sure that the scores are consistent. So once you've applied the selection criteria, worked out who is provisionally selected for redundancy, you then need to set up a second round of consultation meetings to explain the implications to the employees. Now, there is a debate about whether you need to go back to everyone in the pool or just those who've been provisionally selected for redundancy. If you do go back just to those provisionally selected for redundancy, and then you need to alter the scores, you may need to call people back into meetings, which could be difficult. So my feeling is, if you're doing a relatively small program, best to meet with everyone second time round too. And the main purpose of the second consultation meeting is again to give employees a chance to have an input into the process, particularly to check that they're happy with the way their scores have been applied. You don't have to give them the scores of everyone else, you just need to give them their own individual score and explain how that impacts on them. Having conducted the second round of consultation meetings, normally you'll be in a position to make a final decision. And what you need to do then is to draw up formal letters of dismissal on redundancy grounds, which will explain why the people who are being dismissed for redundancy are being dismissed, hopefully to thank them for their contribution to your organisation, and to set out exactly what they're going to get once they've been dismissed. In fact, it's a criminal offence to fail to provide a written calculation of a statutory redundancy payment. It's not criminal not to tell people everything else they're going to receive, but obviously it's best practice, if you are issuing these letters, to tell people exactly where they stand, when their notice expires, when their last day of work is, and all that.